Dorothy Vendel West.
Clinton Radford West.
What were your addresses during the war?
1046 Walter Avenue, Des Plaines, Illinois.
No, Linden Street. I forget the exact address. I know where the house is, though.
Can you tell us about your parents and any sisters or brothers?
Well, my father worked for a bank. My mother was a homemaker. My sister, when she was 21, decided, well, the war had started, and she decided she was going to go and enlist because there wasn't a son in the family. And my parents said, okay, because she'd always been kind of frail in health, and they didn't think that they would take her. And she came bouncing back and said, I have 3 weeks to get my affairs in order, and I'm going to be a WAC. And that was not received very well by my parents. They didn't think that was so good. But she did, and she went through officer's candidate training and became an officer. And she was stationed in, Camp Tyson, Paris, Tennessee. And that was a unit where they had blimps that were sent out to protect the White House and the Capitol if they had an air raid. I don't know how they worked that, but that's what it was. And I was in high school, and I was writing Christmas cards when the radio said that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And I went downstairs and asked my dad, because they'd had an Orson Welles program that was a hoax. And I thought maybe this was another one. And he said, no, this was for real.
Can you tell us about any sisters or brothers you had?
Well, let's see. I came up here in my junior year. My father was in aviation. I grew up with it. I was a mechanic on these aircraft, which interests you. Along with a brother. And my view of the war is completely different. First, I came up with a southern accent where I could not go into a store and ask for something that was not asked again. They knew what I said, they just wanted to hear the accent. Lived in Frogtown, Des Plaines, that's what they called it. It was a swampy area, and they built it up in there. I was interested in aviation mechanics. They paved the road there with a real steamroller. I talked to the man how we went through testing it, because I understand mechanics, which you have to do with a boiler, so you're not killed. Oh, I don't know. It's just, I did not work. I think maybe Brother John may have worked at Douglas. I don't really remember. I did with my father, repaired an aircraft as a child, recovered it, did a good job. I learned to fly, and then joined the service while it was still legal, so I'm a legal veteran. I can be buried in a military hospital if I elect. I'm not going to do it. And, well, her father is buried from World War I. My father was an airplane mechanic, World War I, and he's buried in a military hospital. 2 uncles, professional. It just goes on for a long time. Let's just stop.
Can you tell us about your neighborhood growing up?
Small town. Des Plaines was small town. At that time, you knew all your neighbors. In fact, the high school, Des Plaines people knew everybody from Des Plaines because we went through from grade school, kindergarten on up. Same thing with Park Ridge. And I hate to say it, but we were rather biased by the influx of people coming from all over the country to work at Douglas Aircraft. And it did change a little bit in our outlook. They used to say Maine East was the country club of high schools, and I think we were rather spoiled because we had golf, they had a plane, they could go down in the basement and have rifle instruction. Is that enough?
Can you tell me what your parents did for a living?
My father was with banks, LaSalle Bank, Citizens Bank, and then finally Citizens Bank, or I guess Citizens was in Park Ridge. Cosmopolitan was the third one. My mother didn't work.
Okay.
Clinton?
All right, my mother was a school teacher in Des Plaines, and when she had trouble with the kids, she said, "Sitting Sie down," and all these little German kids shut up and sat down. My father, as I said, was a mechanic, an aviator, and going back to when as a child I lived in a lot of places, including the middle of the Mississippi River with water under the hull, which is a completely different story.
His dad bought, what was it?
He bought a 2,000-ton sailing bark Olinda at a Cherokee for $500, which was a humongous amount of money. You could buy a new car for that, because he was an incurable romantic. He eventually had to scrap it. Probably the iron went to Japan to build the war machine.
The country was coming off of the Depression when the war started. How was the economic situation of your family?
We never had any difficulty. I had friends that would tell me about when I started working in the city, that would tell me how hard it had been, and we just never had that. There was no break, in our finances, and I had a great childhood, so I don't know.
No problem. My father always had work, and later on my mother taught school, so that was all right.
Can you tell us about what you both were like as teenagers?
Well, I wore braces and I had glasses, so I was a little intimidated by that fact all of a sudden to have that. I had friends. We did lots of things. We'd go into Evanston to go shopping, the girls. We went downtown. One friend and I would go to Carson's so we could buy modern library books for $1 out of our allowance. Was just a very easy life. I guess after I started working and heard some of the other stories of friends of mine, I realized that it was not what everybody else had.
What was the question?
What were you
Well,
like as a teenager?
Well, like I say, I went to 3 different high schools. First one of the high schools in Texas, or the freshman year is in the junior high, and the 3 sacred things of old Texas was football, ROTC, and prayers in the local thing by the local Baptist minister. Now, they got rid of it in Texas, and those crazy Texans are trying to bring it back. If it's your religion, that's great. Then I decided I wanted to learn things. I took a streetcar across Fort Worth to a technical high school because I wanted to learn wood shop and other things. It was a mistake because I was the only kid in the class that wanted to learn. I had a fight. I beat the guy. I got a B just because I had to do something. And then I came up to Maine, where you people are much more civilized.
Can you tell us about the atmosphere at high school when the war started?
Well, I have to say it really, except for the senior boys leaving to enlist and the sale of war stamps and things like that, it really didn't affect us that much. I'm ashamed to say that, but it was true. It was only after they started having movies with depicting, battles that you became aware of what was happening. I will say, when I was 15, I was working downtown during the summer for an export-import firm, typing Spanish form letters, and I had to check lists of people that were Nazi sympathizers so that we didn't do business with them. And I was there when D-Day happened, and they closed the office, and we all went down Madison. Everybody was shouting and hugging, and we went to the Palmer House Empire Room. Of course, they could have drinks, but I couldn't. I was only 15. And now I wonder how I had a job, because I think most students needed a pass, 16-year-old. But because I was younger and with them, they probably assumed I was 16.
Can you tell us about your friends when you went to high school?
Well, I had like 2 sets of friends. And if one was doing something that I wasn't interested, I'd see what the other set was doing. And well, I had one set, one particular friend that we both liked to read, and so we would swap books, and that was the one we'd go downtown to buy books. I had another friend that was very frivolous and kind of ditzy, and she was fun to go shopping with in Evanston. And we just had a nice, friendly group. Well, one thing, I think we rode the bus, the same school bus. We got it locally. And so you had probably half an hour, 45 minutes that you could gossip on the way to school in the morning. In the afternoon, then it was whatever sometimes you got a ride, sometimes you walked.
Just want to make sure you go back on, there's that part of there, where do you remember about the start of the war? Just make sure it's on the beginning, there's a little section there. And Clinton did. Just right up back here, what do you remember about the start of the war?
Okay.
Second page, there you go.
Clinton, what do you remember about the start of the war?
I don't remember it at all.
No?
I don't know why. The only thing I remember was when Japan and Hiroshima was bombed. I was on an elevated train and I read a newspaper over a man's shoulder. And unknowingly to most people, thousands of people in this world knew about the possibility of the bomb, including me. And I misread it. I thought it said they dropped it, and my first thought was we've lost the war. And then I reread it, and then I realized we did win the war. What people don't know, in about early, I believe it was Scientific Popular Science or something, had put an article in the possibility of that bomb. And after we got on the program, they went through all the libraries and confiscated those. It was known all over the world by most advanced scientists and learned people that that bomb was possible. And since I have a background in chemistry, the real problem was how to get the material, not how to build a bomb.
Did you work or do any volunteer work as a student?
No. If I did, I don't remember it. I think my father required me to do a number of things, so I did for him whatever he asked.
What did you think of the war?
Well, my hobby is history, so I could go on for hours, and it may overlay what I know now, what I thought then. It was the most destructive war in history. Maybe not on a percentage basis, because there were some really nasty ones, but in the total, it was there. I've gotten into the personality of the people that drove it. They say my hobby is history, so that's something I don't think we want to go on right now.
Okay. Did any of your friends enlist?
I wouldn't have known because I came up here. I didn't. What few friends I got in high school, I've all lost them, or they're gone or dead. So I have no idea.
And did you enlist?
Yes.
When and what branch?
1946 in the United States Army, and I was assigned to the Air Corps, and I was sent to become a C-54 mechanic.
And what did you do?
Worked on these things, started them, whatever they needed. Tried to outrun my goofy commanding general, and you can't outrun a B-25 with a Jeep. And that idiot, we had a safety officer who was a civilian, and he ate him out but good because he was an idiot. A lot of people don't realize it. B-25s are a relatively simple aircraft to fly, so they issued them to officers. Very often, the co-pilot did the work and the general took the credit.
So, Maine High School had assemblies when students, soldiers were killed. What do you remember about that?
I don't recall that. I do know, is it Rickenbach?
I didn't hear him.
Rickenbacker, was that the one that had been in,
I wouldn't know.
well, we had a well-known war hero come, and I think it was Rickenbacker. And one of the things he told us, he said, when you're starting to work, he said, set aside a certain amount of your salary so that you can tell, if you don't like the job, you can tell them to go to hell and leave. And that was one thing I remembered, and I always saved money, and I would quit jobs, and I never had to worry because I had my little backlog.
The war bond drive to buy a C-54 built at Douglas Aircraft happened in 1945. And what do you remember about that?
Well, I was not actively involved in selling. Oh, the only thing I did was the save stamps, and I think that I was given war bonds as a gift, but I myself didn't do too much that way. I think Park Ridge really spearheaded that drive and did very well.
I may have bought some stamps, but since I worked for my father and was not paid, I had no money anyway, other than just an allowance to go to school.
So, neither of you sold bonds to anyone?
No.
No.
Make sure you ask her the top questions.
So, okay.
I did think of one thing when you asked about home life. We had a neighbor across the street that would rent rooms out, and a gentleman had gone over there and decided he didn't like the house. It was overrun with cats. And he came to our house because we had the flag with the star showing that we had someone in service, and he asked if he could rent a room, and my father said, no, we don't do that. And he said he was in security for Douglas Aircraft, and he thought he had a very good spiel that if they needed places for people to stay, that you might just be stuck with anybody. And he said, you've got somebody in service, don't you want to, do something for the war effort? So my father said, okay, but they took my room. And I got my sister's, which was larger. But so he did stay with us, and he'd been with the FBI and had said that his wife left because they wanted to get revenge on him. He even had a steel door put on his home. And I know he had a target set up in the closet, and with an air rifle he used to do gun practice up there. And one time I answered the telephone and they said, this is the Chicago police, and do you know someone by this man's name? And I said, yes. And he said, I'm sorry to say, but we have taken a body out of the river, and it had the wallet in with this man's name. And we, were startled. My dad said, don't worry, I don't think it's him. And sure enough, about an hour and a half later, he showed up, and he said, oh, it's just all a mistake. So either a pickpocket picked on the wrong man and ended up in the river, or it was something else, but nobody ever contacted us again. Nothing was ever said, so I don't know. But this man was very, he looked like a French Canadian. He had huge shoulders, and my father was not afraid of most men, but he said he would be very difficult to win a fight with. So he stayed there until D-Day, and then he decided he had a new wife, and my father said no, that he couldn't stay. So then they left, and I got my room back.
How did you guys feel about all the changes you experienced during the war years?
Well, when you don't know, you just accept. I mean, everybody else was collecting tin cans. You had to smash them, collecting all the grease that you used, in cooking, and that was taken to the butcher. Everybody had gas rationed. I mean, that was shoes. I do know we didn't have gas rationing and to enable us to go up to Wisconsin, but our neighbor was someone who had unlimited, and so he gave us some of his tickets. And we got up almost to where we wanted to go, but we ran out of gas, and the gas station said, they haven't made a delivery yet, you have to wait until they deliver. So a little line of cars was waiting there. We waited about an hour and a half, and finally the truck came, and then we could get gas and continue.
Okay. What do you remember about VE Day?
Oh. Well, I really don't remember that much about that one.
Okay.
How about you, Colin?
I don't know. I guess the only thing I remember is the
It was
article
over.
on the bomb. That was it.
I think everybody was amazed at the effects of that bomb, and there was a lot of controversy that the United States had used it, but they said they saved so many lives by cutting the war short with it that it actually was more humane.
The order had gone out from the Japanese High Command to kill all of the prisoners, and that bomb saved those people's lives. If you get into Japanese psychology, Japan was run by a minor group, the warlords, and they would kill anybody, any Japanese that opposed them. Well, I could go on. We won't go into that.
So what do you remember about VJ Day?
Oh, well, I called it VD Day because that was the first, that was Europe, but that's right. That was when I was downtown and everybody was celebrating. VJ Day is the one that I don't remember where I was or so.
Okay. You graduated almost at the same time as the end of the war. Can you tell us about your life right after graduation?
Well, I had a scholarship and I could have gone to college, but I decided I didn't want to. I just wanted to get out into the business world, which I did. And I did finally go to business school, and the girls in my class were all going to, I think it was Miss Gibbs, which was supposed to get you ready for higher positions. We had to wear gloves and hats and I decided I didn't want that. I'd rather go to the Bryan and Stratton School where they were accepting veterans because that would be co-ed. And so that's what I did, and I left that and went into the first interview I had was with a railroad, and they hired me. I was 19, and that was interesting.
When I joined the service, I spent 3 years in the service. I spent 2 years in the Crown Colony of Newfoundland before it was part of Canada. So I understand those people, how they think, what goes on, and say I still follow their views.
Looking back on your experience as a teenager during the war years, what would you want to tell today's generation about your experience?
Well, I think even though we went through a war, I think that young people nowadays are more aware of world affairs and politics, and I think we were rather naive at that time. So you people are really better off than what we were.
Well, communication today is completely different than in the past. You're flooded with it, but you still better know who is telling you the truth and not. It's very difficult. And also, how your own personal experience will affect how you receive news. That's something I've learned from history.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I have a few.
Yeah.
Should we switch? Or?
Yeah, why don't you switch?
Okay.
Also,
Yeah, I was
Check
just
out.
gonna touch on personal life a bit more. Like there's a few. Sure. Did you want your? Okay. All right. So I just wanted to talk about your personal life a little bit more.
Okay.
How did things change in your family when the war started?
Well, my sister left. Other than that, everything went on as usual, except we did have the introduction of a stranger in our household. We weren't able to travel as much because my parents were both from Wisconsin, and we had spent more time with them, which we were not able to do because of gas rationing.
So then about the gas rationing, what was it about your neighbor that allowed them to have unlimited gas?
He worked for the telephone company, and he had to have gas, to service because they were short of young men in AT&T then, and he was older, so he was doing double time.
And so you were trying to go to Wisconsin to visit your family up there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then about you, how did things change in your family?
The gas, I never saw it. We didn't really require it, and that was about it.
But did food rationing kind
No, I
of...
didn't. It didn't bother me at all. And when I grew up, I saw abject poverty. I saw people walking to school barefoot in the snow, and you get to where you're inured to it. It wasn't just, but that's life.
May I say something about the food? Food rationing. We had some very peculiar recipes that came out at that time so that you could save you didn't get as much meat, and so they had vegetables that were supposed to have protein. Lots of, I guess, mushrooms were touted as having protein, and squash, and things that the Army might not want is what we subsisted on. But, I mean, the food was, you still had food, so.
Important. Also, how was dating like in high school? Was that high importance to you?
Not to me. There were a lot of my girlfriends were very they were very interested in John because he was extremely good looking, and I tended to like older people. For the turnaround dance, I took a senior when I was a sophomore, and I thought some of the boys my age were rather juvenile. So.
Oh, I remember going to two dances. Once I invited a girl from Park Ridge, and the name passes out of my head right now.
Good.
And then, and then her girlfriend asked me to the girls' choice, and I went with her. I was interested in girls. You are at that age. You people are aware of that when you're just bubbly with hormones, but so be it.
So, did neither of you work as a student during high school? Okay.
I did. But, well, I tried. Most of my friends were waitresses. Two of them worked out at Douglas in the cafeteria. And I think a lot of the students from the high school got jobs. That review that you had with the class of 45 and 46, some of the fellows said that they had worked at Douglas and they got 65 cents per hour, which amazed me because I was paid $25 for my work, but of course I had to spend a good part of that getting a train ticket down.
Is it 25 a month or a week? Or?
It was a month,
Okay.
but I had to spend a good portion of that just getting down and back, but that was much better. I tried waitressing and I didn't like it. My neighbor's mother had a restaurant in Arlington Heights, and I went there one afternoon, and the neighbor came and she said, well, I knew it was Dorothy because I could see her picking things up like this from the table, and I didn't go back. So that's the one I had downtown was the only job I had.
What did you say you did downtown?
I typed Spanish form letters, and I was responsible for checking out the Nazi sympathizer list that we were not supposed to.
Did you find any matches or anybody? What would happen then? Like if there was a Nazi sympathizer?
I went to my boss. I think I only found one or two, and I went to him, and then they just ceased because they would have been fined and
So are you multilingual then? You know Spanish?
a long time ago I took Spanish lessons from the wife of the Colombian consul, and we were required to speak only Spanish, and I was getting pretty good, but then I quit the job I had and went to San Francisco, so that was the end of that.
So tell us about how you guys ended up meeting and dating and getting married.
Well, I worked downtown, and my mother had an operation. My dad worked for the bank. The bank was open Friday nights, and so that kind of killed my social life. And I went to the church. They had a young adult group, and they had contacted me. So I figured, okay, I'll go. That'll be something to get out of the house. And I met Clinton there. And he was the catch of the day, I guess. All of the girls went out with Clinton.
No, that's flattering. But I had my choice, and in the end, I chose this one.
Chose well.
So we've lasted 53 years, so I guess we did do.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, well, he had one girl that he had a Jaguar sports car, and when it would come over the railroad tracks, you could hear it going vroom. And if he wasn't at my door in 5 minutes, I knew he was seeing Sue on the next block over, so I could kind of keep track of with what was going on. So.
Did you have a car in high school, Clinton?
No,
Very
that would
few
have been
did.
wartime. I grew up partly in Louisiana when there was no driving license, and you would see 8-year-olds driving. I'm not kidding you, and well, they did. There was none. What little driving I did not have a driving license. I remember getting stuck under the L when the car got in 2 gears at once. I ran into a tavern, I don't ever remember being in one, and grabbed some matches and dived under the car, reached up and said, one of these levers will get me in the proper gear. I hope I pull the right one. I took it, drove it back, picked up my father, and we fixed the car and went home. I did understand mechanics. I worked with them too much.
Was it difficult when you came up here from, where was the last state before you moved here? Was it
well,
Tennessee or what was it?
I came up here in the sophomore year. I mean, I was a junior up here.
No,
And I graduated in 45, so I'd be 43.
Texas and,
Oh, you're
and
from Texas.
Louisiana.
Yes.
Was it really hot? Did people really give you a hard time for being from the South when
No.
you came up here?
No, they just interested in the voice. That was all. And it's a different culture. My mother did not understand some of these speech patterns. I did. I have never had any trouble understanding English, whether it's spoken by New England, Canadians, India. I read that.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have certain colloquialisms from the South. My sister married someone from Tennessee, and very well educated, but he still would say, "You wait on me, Cindy." And she'd say, "I don't wait on anybody." And so he finally got some of those out of the vocabulary.
Oh, you become aware of their various words. Toy down south is play pretty. I got my new play pretty. You want to see my new red roadster?
Yeah,
It could be anything.
yeah. Your mother always did that with the children. And
Yeah.
it startled me because she was well educated,
Yeah.
and to me, play pretty is not a good description. You know, it's just,
No, she and I, we were able to look at the difference in culture. She's Scandinavian, which you're cold in public, very warm in private. And now Italians are loud all the time, and I became aware of the black population, their differences in how they think.
those are stereotypes now, dear. You don't do that.
They aren't always stereotypes, you find out. I mean, it's fun, but you can't say any one person is any one thing because you don't know. And since I grew up in the South and because I'm accustomed to seeing color, I would ask black men sometimes where they were brought up, and one fellow was a pilot in Nebraska, so he had Midwest, and you can go. And I can hear the accent from a mile away. Even in the local area around Fort Worth, there are two of them. One is very melodious, and one of them screeches. And these are the white people, not the blacks.
Was there anything
Do you want to
surprising?
switch? Do you want to switch seats? Just-
So when you came up, was there anything surprising or different about Illinois or coming north, or not too much, or how was it?
It's just colder. Learn how to shovel coal, about it. That's about it.
Did you guys have coal-fired furnaces?
Yes, that's what it is.
We were lucky.
I like to rise early. I'd get up in the morning and fire the coal. My brother John, who was in the other class of, what was it?
46.
46, would do it at night, and that was it. It didn't take long to learn. Of course, you have coal dust and other things, but
Now, that was one thing after the war. We got in line to get oil. You had to sign up. And if you thought about it and got in there in the beginning, then you could get off the chore of shoveling coal.
Right. I forgot. I've heard about that, but nobody has it anymore. I forgot.
yeah, it's not hard to learn. But if you have to be shown once how to do it, how to make it burn fast, how to bank it so it lasts all night. There's a technique to it. You have to rake out the cinders, and
And a lot
it's
of
a
those,
messy thing.
they put that on the driveway. Use
Yeah.
the cinders on the driveway lots of times.
Oh, okay.
Now, there is a ship on the Great Lakes that's still burning coal, and there's a big deal about them dumping the ashes. Interesting ship, but we took a trip on it once just out of curiosity. And since I like ships, I understand it.
So Clinton, you enlisted. Did you enlist before graduate or after?
A year afterwards, my brother graduated. It was in 1946, and legally, he and I were veterans of World War II.
Right. Now, did you guys know? You didn't know anybody else who joined the service other than your sister?
My sister, my cousin George,
Oh yeah.
from Wisconsin, he was an expert skier, and he hoped to get in the ski troops, and of course he ended up in the Pacific on an island, a rock.
Of course.
Yes, but
So what happened to your sister after? So she was a WAC officer, and
Mhm.
then when did she come home? And what
well,
was,
she met her husband in the service, and they married. And when they were closing up Camp Tyson, they were shipping personnel over to the eastern, around the Japanese war, and she was pregnant by that time, so she was out of the service. And my brother-in-law was an MP, and apparently he was still needed for while they were closing down the camp.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, but you know, you're talking about having problems. When I went down to Tennessee to visit them, Memphis, I got all of this. This is a Yankee girl. They carry their own bags and open their own doors.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, we were
They
trained down
teasing.
south. You open the doors for women. You gave them their seat on the train or whatever, the streetcar. And up here, bang! You finally learn to just take it yourself.
Well, they were just teasing, but because my brother-in-law is 11 years older than I, and I was his kid sister, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that those are. I really appreciate that. Do you guys have anything else? And those are all the questions. Did anybody else have any other questions? Follow-up questions? Oh, go ahead. You can ask. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I'll just tell you a little bit about. So we found the you know, that plane that they dedicated.
Mhm.
So it's actually still in existence. It's not flyable, but it's in a boneyard in the desert. But it's a town. It's a.
Is it on a Native American reservation?
It's on an Indian reservation.
Yeah, I
used to
think
be an
it's with a
airstrip.
whole bunch of other aircraft.
Yeah.
They chop up for parts or whatever.
Right. But we've located it and actually we've talked to the tribal leaders and may be able to get some of the
Now,
parts
they-
out of it.
Oh.
There is a Canadian outfit that still flies 54s in North Canada with the piston engines. So it interests me because I know something about it. My father flew it with a German pilot after World War II. He flew the Mexican president's loot into the island so it's not seen. He flew freshwater porpoises out of the Amazon to Florida and a number of other things, so we got an interest in what they did. They flew it overweight, and aircraft have various weights, which was legal down in South America, which is scary because if it's loaded with explosive and he loses an engine, it may go boom.
Did you when during the war, did your father work at the Douglas plant or did
And he was a mechanic, kind of a co-pilot. He would check them. One thing, all kinds of things you have to do. You have trim tabs. You have to see if they're correctly installed. On a large airplane, if they're misset, you cannot overpower it. You're going down.
That one article said he was a test pilot, too.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know if
best.
that was just
I'm not
making it
too
more
sure.
interesting.
My father liked to exploit things, but he was an aviator, and he did understand aircraft. And before he came up here, he had been building North American T6s. And like I say, his aviation went back to World War I.
so he did work at the Douglas plant?
Yes,
then?
he did work at the Douglas plant. I still have a 1,000-watt bulb out of the Douglas plant.
Oh, okay. So that's one souvenir. Do you have from there?
Well,
We had the filing cabinets.
we had all kinds of things, and he liked to build things. And he took a lot of lumber out of there and built a garage that's been torn down long years later.
We got lots of lumber, too, to use in the
Yeah.
one little. Well, that's another thing. You had to have hot water. It was a little kind of a furnace thing, and you'd heat that up, and then the water would get hot in the hot water tank. Otherwise, we had cold water.
Yeah, how did you keep, so did you have a little coal fire for the hot water tank, or?
We did. I don't know.
Well, most places they would use it. You want hot water, you go turn the gas underneath the water heater for your bath. It did not run. It was not regulated.
Huh.
Because you go much further than that, you heat it on the stove and pour it in the tub.
And if you had a date and you washed your hair, you had to stick your head in the oven to dry it because there were no hair dryers at that time.
Really?
Well, maybe I don't. We didn't have any. I know.
That's right, though.
Then later on, they got those huge things that you could buy and have it at home.
Wow. That's great.
Well, when you woke up in the morning, I always had the top of my dad's pajamas, and I would sleep in that and put my clothes on the radiator. My dad would get up early, start the fire, and the radiator would get warm. My clothes would be warm, and I could get dressed underneath the top because it was cold. You know, by that time the furnace had gone out during the night, and you had to start it up again.
Right, you had to stoke it again in the morning.
And in the morning, if you washed your face, it was ice cold water. So you bathed in the evening when you had the hot water heater hot.
I see. Huh. Didn't know that.
Well, camping was nothing, you know, because that's what we had at home when we were growing up.
Sure.
Except the first 9 years of my life, I lived in the city, and we had a co-op apartment, and there we had always had hot water. We always had heat.
Right.
So we moved out to Des Plaines. There were less than 10,000 people at that time, and that was rural.
Did you, I forgot to, did you have a victory garden or anything? Or,
No, we didn't.
Okay.
We didn't have room for
Oh,
something
okay.
like that.
You guys didn't have, did you have
Oh,
one?
it was a little bit in Texas where we came north. But in a lot in Fort Worth, it was a small house. There was plenty of room. We weren't very good farmers at the time. I know more about it now. I know how to make it go, but it really doesn't interest me too much. But if I had to, I could do it.
Well, our relatives in Wisconsin had a summer home and the home in town, and you could go down the bank and get on the river and take that down to where the summer home was, Lake Wausau. And he had a huge lot, and he had an enormous victory garden. It was watered by the lake, and lots of neighbors benefited.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you canned in those days. That's another thing. You got a ration for 100 pounds of sugar if you were canning.
Oh, did you do that?
My mother did.
Did
yeah.
she? Did you help out with the canning?
Only the grape. My mother didn't want to. You put grapes in a bag, and you had to squeeze it to get the juice out. And well, your hands got purple. Well, she didn't want to have purple hands, so I had to do it. And to this day, I don't like grape jelly. So.
I understand.
No, we'd go into Michigan and get a bushel of peaches and one of apples, and got grapes and berries if they were in season. We went.
But fruit is not the same it used to be. If you had a peach, it was fuzzy, it'd almost sting your mouth when you bit it, but some of them tasted better. When they start messing with it, they don't always keep the taste.
Mm-hmm.
So vegetables and that type of thing has changed a lot.
Sure.
And in the old days, you can buy a watermelon, and they were basically seedless. You didn't get that in those days.
Right.
That's not a big deal. Put 2 and you're done.
Right. Did you have rations? Did you have like shoe rations?
Yes.
Did you have any problems with that, or did you?
Well, I bought shoes that were not ration. The first time I wore them, the soles just separated from the top part. So after that, I was more careful, and I only bought, with the coupon.
Right.
Well,
That was a scam.
you used to resole shoes out. Now, modern shoes you can't do much with because
Right.
they're made in one unit. And I've tried it a few. Just junk the things and buy some more. Then it's not cost effective. But In the old British Army and in the Roman Army, they had people who did resoling with the soldiers' shoes. It goes back for thousands of years. People are not aware of that.
Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. Does anybody else have anything?
You said something about a summer home one of your
Mhm.
neighbors had on a lake. What?
But it was Lake Wausau. It was up in Wisconsin.
How do you spell that?
WAUSAU. And they had the end unit. Their property was next to the county asylum, and they would have they rotate their cattle. And when one pasture was down, then they would move it to another. And so we could play if the cattle weren't in that area at
Mhm.
that time. But no, they had chickens. First time I was a city kid, the first time I saw a chicken get the head cut off, it was awful because it kept on moving. They said it takes a while for the nervous system to recognize it.
Well, when you walk or anything else, the spine runs it. Even human beings, you stand up beheaded, they'll walk. It's not how the human brain is rigged and so
Well,
forth.
to this day, I don't really care much for chicken.
I can understand that. Well, thank you very much for coming. That has been really, really great.
Well,
A
Thanks.
few
it was
things,
painless. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And any other? Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go.
Did either of you play any sports in high school or were involved in any clubs?
Oh, well, I think I was in a Latin and debate. I can't remember. I think I had some golf. I can't remember if it was then. I know I had golf lessons, but I can't remember if they were private now or if that was from the school.
Again, I played freshman football, learned the fundamentals of football, how to punch through a line. And in the service, when they put the young men to fight it out, the opposition never understood how I could go through him. I didn't tell him.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
And we'll keep in touch as we finish up the project, and we want to show you the whole thing then.
Okay.
Okay.
That would
Thank
be
you.
interesting.
Thank you very much coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.